The Africa Mining Vision is a developmental framework.
If I want you to explain the AMV in, let's say, 3 sentences, what would you say?
Africa's development framework, not mining. The AMV actually touches on the whole value chain from the upstream to the mid and down to the most advanced downstream, to the extent of touching on circularity.
One of the risks that fascinated me was the sharp deployment of technologies that could even render some mineral that you've identified as redundant. How would you expect Africa to deal with this particular risk that has been identified?
From the ground to the grid, Africa has got the resources, but how do we thrive when we do not correctly leverage the vast resources at our disposal? Welcome to Blindspot Africa, the podcast where stakeholders come together to shape the future of Africa's energy and extractive resources. Listen to fresh insight and real dialogue on how inclusive resource governance can be beneficial for all Africans.
Hello, welcome once again to another edition of the Blindspot Africa, where we shine the light on critical issues around the energy and extractive sector in Africa. I'm here with the busiest person you could ever meet on the mining endeavor stage, and it's very nice to have him here. It's an honor to have him here, and we are happy that he has finally joined us for this conversation. And today we want to delve deep into the Africa Mining Vision, the Africa Green Mineral Strategy, and what it means for countries, and what it means for value addition, what it means for supply chain development in the mining sector. I'm here with no other than the Programs Officer at the Africa Minerals Development Center, Dr. Mkhululi Ncube. Maybe I've mentioned it well, maybe I have not, but I'll allow him to mention his name for us so that we can get the correct pronunciation. Mkhululi, thanks for coming.
Thank you for having me, Charles. Yes.
All right. Maybe you should tell viewers how to correctly pronounce your name.
Mkhululi Ncube.
Okay. So, the Africa Mineral Development Center.
Right.
What do you do?
So
AMDC for short.
Yes, AMDC for short. So the Africa Mining Vision was adopted by heads of state in 2009. And for 4 years, we were in a celebratory mode as a continent to say we now have our own developmental framework that aligns our mineral resources to Africa's development trajectory. But of course, for those 4 years, we realized there needed to be an institution, a center, a think tank, a policy lead when it comes to implementing the Africa Mining Vision. And so, with the help of the United Nations Economic Commission for Africa, as a project, the Africa Mineral Development Center was launched in 2013. It came up with quite a number of instrumental implementation tools for the Africa Mining Vision. One of them being the Country Mining Vision Guidebook, which was a way to take the Africa Mining Vision and implement it at country level, and even give a process of how to do it at country level. And then there was the African Minerals and Energy Resource Classification Framework, based on the United Nations Framework Classification for mineral resources. For mineral and energy resources. That was done in 2016. And then there was the African Mineral Governance Framework, which is a tool that then measures and foresees, or rather sees initially as a diagnostic, how a country is doing in aligning with the Africa Mining Vision, and uses that diagnostic to then have intervention policies or frameworks or strategies to cater towards aligning with the Africa Mining Vision. That was in 2018. And at the time, we were still in a transition to the African Union, because now the African Union had accepted that AMDC was going to be a specialized agency of the African Union, tasked with implementing the Africa Mining Vision. And it was going to be hosted, or it will be hosted, in Guinea-Conakry, after a competitive bidding process by all member states. Guinea came up tops. And yeah, that is what we are. And at the moment, we are in that transition to moving towards an economy.
So let's look at the African mining vision. If I want you to explain the AMV in, let's say, 3 sentences, what would you say?
Africa's development framework, not mining, but an African development framework that wants to utilize mineral resources as a basis towards economic transformation, right? That's one long sentence, and I'll stick it at that. The name in itself is merely counterintuitive because people have the ability to initially think it's about mining. Yeah. The African Mining Vision is a developmental framework. At the very least, it's an industrial development framework.
Yeah.
And it's at its most capable and advanced, it's an economic transformation framework.
Yeah.
It's just that we speak to mining because a lot of people do not understand how the extractive nature of the global. So it is not a mining development framework per se. It's an economic transformation framework. And as such, when we then start talking about how we are involved or want to counter illicit financial flows, we want to counter resource extractivism that is aligned to peace and instability, it then starts touching on, or even the implementation of the African Continental Free Trade Agreement, all right? It all touches on those aspects, but people then have this mistaken notion of thinking it's only about mining, which is just one part of the value chain.
Yeah.
So in short, the AMV actually touches on the whole value chain, from the upstream to the mid and down to the most advanced downstream, to the extent of touching on secularity.
You're listening to Blindspot Africa. In this podcast, we delve deeper into critical issues of resource governance, including those that may not typically be highlighted in the media. We discuss the facts, figures, challenges, and pathways for Africa to achieve its full wealth potential. We also illuminate strategies on how citizens can demand accountability for resources managed on their behalf. Stay tuned for more insights.
How have countries embraced this? Because I can see that you have a country mining vision guidebook that is supposed to perhaps guide member states in achieving, the overall vision that AMDC has. What has been the response of countries towards this overall development framework?
It's overall been, what's the word? Positive. Because if you then, we have looked at how mineral policies, frameworks, and strategies on the continent have advanced, have changed, have outrightly been revamped or repealed since 2009, which is when it was launched, and how accelerated that was since 2014, which is when the Country Mining Vision Guidebook came up. We always pick a number. We always pick the number of 25 because we actually at one point monitored and counted 25 countries that had actually redone their mineral policies, mineral frameworks, or those that are aligned to mineral development from 2009 and those from 2014 and onwards. So in terms of member states as a whole understanding what the AMV is, we're happy about it. We now need a bit more accelerated implementation on certain tools. And of course, as we are merely a demand-driven entity and think tank and policy framework advisor, right, the AMDC is always ready to help member states in adopting the AMV.
For the past 2 to 3 years, you were deeply involved in the drafting and the design of a green mineral strategy that looks at the current boom of critical minerals, green minerals, whatever people would want to call it. How does the AGMS, which is the Africa Green Mineral Strategy, successfully launched last year, how does it link to the overall goals of the Africa Mining Vision?
So, in short, the joy of foresight. The African Green Mineral Strategy is actually a distillation of the Africa mining vision, just that it targets the minerals that are being said to be the just energy transition minerals, the ones that are involved in the decarbonization agenda, global or otherwise. But the tenets and the actual implementation of the AMV is what the AGMS is, just focusing on those.
Thank you for visiting
16
Mining and Dial 20.
That is what the African Green Mineral Strategy is, and it is a good way to segue into implementation of the AMV. And so its adoption last year was a big win, not only for the AMDC or the continent, but for the greater humankind. Because the AMV definitely is a bit more functional in ensuring that resources work for the betterment of humanity.
And it seems to have that same developmental agenda like the AMV.
Yes.
I like the 4 pillars. You talked about mining development, you talk about human development, you have environmental stewardship, and there's a 4th line that perhaps my memory hasn't captured. That's what was the thinking around choosing these particular 4 pillars for the AGMS?
So the 4 pillars have always been the way we've wanted to approach implementation of the AMV. And so now it gives us an opportunity to do so whilst targeting those 16 minerals whose value chains will now be very instrumental and also be developed because of the global rush towards them, right? So we now have a conduit of ensuring that what we've always championed as the AMV can now be adopted by those who are pushing for the extraction of these 16 or so minerals that also align to Africa's development. For instance, for us, we include iron. We include phosphates as part of our critical, or rather green minerals. They're not critical for us. They are green because we are talking about them going towards green industries. It's not saying, I know there's a whole debate that goes on as to why do you call something green? Why do you call something blue? But of course, if you read the document, you understand that there's a thinking behind it. And as such, narratives are not one-sided. We have always believed we can champion a narrative for the betterment of the continent. And that's why it's the African Green Mineral Strategy.
Yeah, and there was also a point about some identified risks. That there were some points that you identify as risk within the strategy. And one of the risks that fascinated me was the rise, the sharp, development of deployment of technologies that could even render some mineral that you've identified as redundant. How would you expect Africa to deal with this particular risk that has been identified?
I'll find that interesting as a narrative that is being pushed for Africa to be worried about. It's not risky for Africa. What is risky is us not developing using the minerals we have for the benefit of our developmental needs. So you hear, for instance, lithium is going to be, replaced by sodium. Fine, let it be replaced by sodium. But the value chains that are aligned to being able to replace lithium with sodium include R&D. They include human capital development. If we do not harness the value chains of lithium and how to convert lithium into lithium-ion batteries, we also won't be able to harness the ability to move sodium to becoming sodium-ion batteries. Let's capture that value inland. And that value, I'm talking about the capacity, intellectual ability to do it. Then we are also then involved in forwarding our own research and development agenda, rather than constantly playing catch-up. We can play catch-up, but you can play catch-up once you know what the basics and fundamentals are. And so some of these risk narratives, we just look at them and we say, okay, just like you call them critical minerals, we'll call ours green minerals.
Well, that is very interesting to know. I know, coming back to the AMV, ratification rate has been a bit slow, and adoption and all of that. Although, as you said, it's being captured in countries' policies and all of that. What is the next steps? around this? What would we tell countries around ratification and making sure that it becomes a very important,
In ensuring that,
Yes.
yes, so in ensuring that the AMDC becomes a fully functional, fully fledged, self-sustaining entity, we would hope that the member states that are yet to ratify its movement towards that level to do so ASAP. And we still continue engaging member states in ensuring that the minimum 15 member states required to have AMDC as a fully fledged entity are moving in that direction.
All right. Thank you very much. And we hope that the implementation is done right and is done at a faster pace.
Thank you, John.
Thank you very much, colleagues. Thank you very much, friends, for joining us in this conversation.
Thank you for joining us on Blindspot Africa, your platform for insightful discussions on promoting inclusive resource governance across the continent. Don't forget to subscribe, share, and leave your feedback or reviews. Stay tuned for our next episode.